In this interview right here, Deontay Wilder talks about a potential fight with Dominic Breazeale. And he says that if the fight gets signed, at the pre-fight press conference, he wants Dominic Breazeale's child to get up on the stage and, in his words, look into the eyes of the man who's going to cripple his daddy. That's what Deontay Wilder says in this particular interview, and people have reacted to this with outrage and disgust, for the most part, condemning what Deontay Wilder has said. First of all, condemning the fact that he's brought Dominic Breazeale's child into this needlessly, which most people see as very distasteful, to say the least. And also condemning him for the fact that he has said that he's basically aiming to cripple Dominic Breazeale. Now, this is not the first time that Deontay Wilder has made some controversial comments. A few months ago, he talked about wanting a body on his record, wanting to catch a body, which means wanting to kill an opponent in the ring. That is apparently one of his career goals. Now, I've been a boxing fan for a long time, several decades, and I've seen countless fighters over the years who have suffered serious head injuries and been left permanently crippled, blinded, and some of them unfortunately even died. It is a very ugly side of our sport. It's very unfortunate, it's very sad, and the sport definitely needs to do more to take care of its fallen soldiers. And I hope that the commissions in boxing continue to work with ringside doctors and doctors in hospitals, as well as trainers and referees, etc., even promoters, to try and reduce the number of serious injuries and fatalities that take place in our sport. Not only because it's bad for the image of the sport in terms of boxing becoming more popular, but also because I care about the fighters and their families in general. They are risking their lives to provide us with entertainment. And I'm certainly not somebody who would have enjoyed myself back in ancient Rome watching people get thrown to the lions and the gladiators and stuff like that. I don't want to see things go that far. You understand? So I'm obviously, compassionate enough to not want fighters to end up seriously hurt and killed. With all that being said, let's first address Deontay Wilder's comments about Dominic Breazeale's child. It was a very callous thing to say, but it's not the first time that a boxer has said something like this. Mike Tyson famously said that he wanted to eat Lennox Lewis's children. That was after his fight with Lou Savarese in Glasgow. He said he wanted to eat Lennox Lewis's children, rip his heart out and feed it to him and all this kind of stuff. Now, at the time, Lennox Lewis didn't actually have any children. But I'm not sure if Tyson knew that or not. But Tyson certainly was a man who said a lot of very controversial things over the years. He talked about killing Razor Ruddock in the rematch. He said, if it don't die, it don't count. I'm trying to kill the guy. Mike Tyson, years after his retirement, admitted that when he was a young fighter, one of his goals was actually to kill somebody in the ring. And I showed the interview where Tyson said this last time I did a video about Deontay Wilder's controversial comments. I showed the actual article where Mike Tyson said, I wanted, when I was a young fighter, to actually kill somebody. Because a lot of the fighters that Mike Tyson grew up studying and admiring, people like Sugar Ray Robinson and Max Baer and people like that, they had killed people in the ring. And Mike Tyson, as he said in the post-fight interview following the Lou Savarese fight, he wanted to be the most brutal, most vicious, and most ruthless champion there's ever been. He compared himself to Alexander the Great. Okay? So Tyson said many. In fact, Deontay Wilder is a quiet boy compared to Mike Tyson. Let's be real, both in and out the ring. That's not to excuse what Deontay Wilder said, particularly about Dominic Breazeale's child. It's not like he threatened to do harm to Dominic Breazeale's child, but he mentioned Dominic Breazeale's child in a very, very dubious context. You know, I mean, basically he's talking about trying to traumatize the child by saying, come here, look into the eyes of the man who's going to cripple your daddy. That is a really callous thing to say. But again, being such a long-time boxing fan and living through all the different eras and controversial characters, I can't say I'm shocked by it. Yeah, I can't say I'm shocked. And with regards to, obviously, I certainly don't condone it. And it's a terrible thing to be saying. And mentioning someone's children like that, personally, I think that's where you may have to toe the line and start issuing people fines. I doubt that's going to happen, but if I was in control of a boxing commission, that's where I might have to step in when people are talking about other people's kids. That's a bit deep, all right? But with regards to Wilder saying he wants to catch a body and saying that he wants to or intends to cripple Dominic Breazeale, I'm not necessarily condoning him making those comments. But what I am saying is, I'm not shocked that Deontay Wilder has these kind of intentions when he goes into the ring to try and cripple and kill opponents. I'm not shocked by that. And not only am I not shocked by that, but I don't think anyone else who follows boxing should be, because if they are, they're not really being honest with themselves about what boxing actually is. They're not really being honest with themselves about how brutal boxing actually is. Boxing is not a civilized sport. It's not a gentleman's sport. Yes, I love it, but I'm honest with myself about what boxing actually is. It's brutal, it's barbaric, and it's actually savage. This is what boxing is. And the only way we can really justify it is by the fact that the participants participate willingly, and many of them are able to earn a much better living as boxers than they'd be able to earn doing anything else. So that's how we justify it. But when campaign groups who are looking to ban boxing use words like brutal and barbaric and stuff like that, I can't sit here and tell you that they're wrong. It is brutal and it is barbaric. Now, how this relates to Deontay Wilder's comments are this. Mike Tyson is a good example of a fighter who was scared when he first started boxing. Teddy Atlas said Mike Tyson was scared. When he was a young kid, he first started, he was frightened. And with the help of Teddy Atlas and more so Customado, Mike Tyson learned to control his fear and channel his fear. And Mike Tyson had a darkness within him. And he was able to channel his fear and channel this darkness, this dark element of his character, into his punches, into his training, etc. And it worked very well for him for so many years. It led him to become the youngest heavyweight champion of all time. Now, there are some fighters who don't channel aggression and dark energy in order to become great fighters. Some of them just become so smart that they don't necessarily throw punches with bad intentions in order to win fights. Somebody like Floyd Mayweather might be a good example of that, certainly in his later years. But everybody can't be Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather's way of beating you is just outsmarting you, essentially. Okay, there's some pain there too, but he's essentially outsmarting you. Whereas fighters like Deontay Wilder, like Mike Tyson, like Sergey Kovalev, these are guys who are not simply going in there to outsmart you, because that's not enough. They don't have the Mayweather skills. Their whole game is, I'm in a sport, I'm talking from, what I imagine their perspective to be. I'm in a sport which is brutal, which is ruthless, both in and out of the ring. My answer to this brutal environment, my only way to survive and to succeed in such a brutal sport and a brutal environment, is to be the most brutal and vicious individual in the sport, certainly in the ring, and in some cases even outside the ring. To channel and harness my animalistic primal instincts to become far more ruthless than my opponents. This is a defense mechanism. This is a survival mechanism. And particularly with these really brutal punchers like Deontay Wilder, Mike Tyson, etc., these really vicious guys, these are not your normal big punchers. These are elite, historically great punchers. And with that, you often, not always, but often find this darkness within them. Customado taught Mike Tyson to throw punches with bad intentions. Why did he never state what those bad intentions were? Why did he just give it the generic term bad intentions? Why? Because it wouldn't be politically correct. All right? It wouldn't be good for PR, the PR of boxing, for Customado to actually come out and explain what those bad intentions were. But if you listen to Mike Tyson, you find out what the bad intentions were. Mike Tyson has explicitly said that one of his aims when he was a young fighter was to kill somebody in the ring. When he fought Jesse Ferguson, he said he was trying to catch Ferguson on the nose bone to drive the nose bone up into the brain, because he'd heard doctors say previously that if the nose bone was driven up into the brain, the chances of the opponent getting up are zero, because he's going to be dead. He talked about killing Razor Ruddock in the rematch. He said, if it don't die, it doesn't count. So on and so forth. And Mike Tyson, the Tyson fanboys want to act like Tyson's just saying this stuff all metaphorically. No, he wasn't. Tyson has said very unambiguously and specifically that he was trying to kill. One of his ambitions as a young fighter was to kill an opponent. He says now, and last time I spoke about this subject, I even had an article on screen where you could see the quotes from Tyson himself. And Tyson, speaking as an old man now, long retired, he said he's obviously now glad that he didn't kill someone, because he wouldn't want to have to live with that guilt today. But back then, he was a different person. He was a different animal mentally. And his whole process of trying to survive in this brutal sport was to make himself the most brutal man. You see, from a psychological point of view, that's what he was doing. And Deontay Wilder appears to be doing the same thing. If you look at Wilder when he fights, you can see he psychs himself up to the point where he's trying to be as brutal as possible. You go look at the Berman-Stavern rematch. He's banging his chest in the rematch. He's like, come on. He's channeling his most animalistic instincts when he's in the ring. And even outside of the ring, this is how he thinks. So him coming out and talking about these kind of things, saying he's going in there with the intention of killing people, you can certainly make an argument that that's not a good thing to say. But if in terms of the image of boxing being tarnished, him saying stuff like that. But if you honestly believe that Deontay Wilder is the only well-known fighter in boxing today who goes in the ring with the intention of causing serious injury and death, if you really believe that, then you are deeply naive. Deontay Wilder just happens to be one of the few fighters who will actually admit it. But trust me, there are plenty of other fighters, well-known fighters, past and present, who go into the ring with these kind of intentions. Sergey Kovalev, unfortunately, has killed a man in the ring. He's somebody who has actually done that. Now, with many fighters who seriously injure opponents or cripple opponents, they become gun shy afterwards when they come back. They suffer psychological trauma themselves and damage, seeing what they've done to their opponent's family, seeing the devastation, seeing the state that their opponent is often left in. Chris Eubanks Sr. was a good example of that. When he crippled Michael Watson, commentators and pundits were, questioning whether, Chris Eubanks Sr. should stay in the sport because he'd lost his, it's an unfortunate term, but quote unquote killer instinct after he crippled Michael Watson. He would hold back when he had opponents hurt. He would pull back because he didn't want to seriously injure somebody again. Now, some fighters are like that, but other fighters feel absolutely nothing, seemingly, because their performances subsequent to seriously injuring or killing somebody don't change. Kovalev is one of those guys. Kovalev's victim, the guy he killed in the ring, his family are still very angry at Kovalev, at the way he's behaved about killing that individual. Now, the family may just be angry anyway, no matter what Kovalev does. But in this particular article here, and I know he's not exactly a neutral person, but John David Jackson talks about the kind of person that Sergey Kovalev is in this interview. He says here, he goes through, these quotes here are talking about, John David Jackson is talking about the fact that a lot of Kovalev's people don't like him and that he's mistreated a lot of people who have helped him. But in this last bit here, he says, Sergey is a borderline racist. He shows it in certain ways. I defended his ass more than a few times. Sergey didn't want either me or Don Turner to work with him. He is good at putting the persona on, but when he's alone, he's a raw, nasty person. Even his own people talk about him like a dog behind his back. I kid you not. His so-called friends couldn't stand him. Now, the racist stuff, I mean, we've talked about that ad nauseum about Sergey Kovalev. But the part I want to focus on here is him saying that Kovalev is a raw, nasty person. Now, when things were seemingly okay on the surface, when they hadn't publicly fallen out, Kovalev and John David Jackson, Jackson even then said Kovalev is one of the meanest people he's ever met. In an interview, he said he's one of the meanest fighters I've ever. I think he said he is the meanest fighter I've met in and out of the ring. He's just a mean guy. Manny Stewart said the same thing about Gerald McClellan. Now, Gerald McClellan, we know, ended up crippled himself. But Gerald McClellan, another historically massive puncher, he also had this darkness in his soul. And he channeled that darkness into his punches. And I'm telling you, people, the mind controls the body. Being able to hit ridiculously hard, and again, we're not talking about the average garden variety big puncher. We're talking about elite punchers, historically big punchers. To be able to channel the kind of energy, the kind of force that it takes to hit that hard on a consistent basis, it takes more than just physicality. It's a mindset that you need to have to be able to hit that hard. It's not just the physicality, it's the mindset. You train with that mindset. You hit the bag with that mindset. You hit the mitts with that mindset. You hit the sparring partners with that mindset. Some people have the mindset naturally. Some people have the mindset because of the environment they grew up in. And other people have the mindset because boxing is a brutal business. And as I explained previously with Mike Tyson, they feel like the best way to protect themselves and ensure that they don't end up as the victim is by being the most brutal and vicious fighter of their era or of their division. That's their way of coping and thriving and succeeding in that kind of environment. And that's what you get with the likes of a Kovalev, of a Wilder, of a Mike Tyson, of a Gerald McClellan. These kind of people have got a darkness within them that they are able to channel into their punches and make them so spectacular. Now, the point I'm making here in a very roundabout way is that my issue is not with fighters who go into the ring with the intention to do serious harm. I can't have an issue with that because that's their process. It's not their job to worry about the welfare of their opponent. That's the job of the ref. That's the job of the medics. That's the job of the commission. You know, in the UK, the British Board of Boxing Control. What goes on in the fighters' heads? Listen, I'm realistic about boxing. That's what I'll tell you. So the issue for me is not the fact that Deontay Wilder has these kind of intentions. The issue for me, or the debate for me, is whether he should be expressing these things publicly. But as I said in a previous video about this topic, the fact that people try to sugarcoat boxing doesn't necessarily sit that well with me, because there is a veneer of falseness to boxing. The way people view it as this noble art and a sport. Boxing is brutal, it's vicious, and it's savage. That's why people end up with brain damage. That's why people end up dead. That's why so many fighters end up punch drunk. That's why you can bring fighters in like cannon fodder to get knocked out. Can you imagine when these young prospects, these powerful guys like a Daniel Dubois and all these people are being brought up in the professional ranks? They literally feed them sacrificial lambs. A guy who gets out of his bed in the morning and by the night he's going to be brutally knocked out. That's what we call a sport. And everybody knows that's going to happen, even him. So I'm honest about what boxing actually is. It's brutal. And so when people are acting as though these fighters are supposed to be so politically correct and they're supposed to come across as gentlemen, I see that as a little bit unrealistic. Because this is not a gentlemanly sport. It's a savage sport. So I don't necessarily expect fighters to conduct themselves the way an average Joe would on the street in terms of being civilized and polite and all that kind. I don't expect that from fighters because they're in a brutal sport with tremendous pressure on them, and different fighters cope in different ways. So if some of them are going in there trying to catch bodies, that's their process. I don't necessarily have a problem with the fact they have that intention. Okay? I just want to make sure that the commissions, the doctors, so on and so forth, put enough safeguards in place, the refs, put enough safeguards in place to reduce or minimize the amount of serious injuries and fatalities that we have in the sport. Yeah? That's I've got a realistic approach to it. You're not gonna, if you take that meanness, that malevolence out of a Deontay Wilder or out of a Mike Tyson, you're simply not going to have the same fighter. You're not going to have someone who's as exciting, who's as devastating, who's as brutal. You're not going to have it. And there was some, Joe Blogs who popped up in the comment section last time I talked about this subject. And they said, well, I used to box and I was a big puncher and I would never go into the ring thinking about killing someone. Yeah, well, you're just an average run-of-the-mill Joe Blogs who tried his hand at boxing. You're not a Deontay Wilder. You're not a historically elite puncher like a Mike Tyson. That's not who you are. So you wouldn't know, right? You haven't operated at the levels that these guys have operated at, being the kind of fighters they are, which is hyper, in Tyson's case, hyper aggressive, this brutal fight, this force of nature that Mike Tyson was. If Mike Tyson didn't have that darkness within his psyche, he wouldn't have been the fighter that he was. He wouldn't have been as entertaining as he was. He wouldn't have given us so many thrills over the years if he didn't have those bad intentions, those evil intentions. You see, this is the reality of it. This is the reality that a lot of people can't seem to come to terms with. So again, my issue is not with the stuff that Wilder is thinking. If he's trying to catch a body or whatever, that's his process. We have referees, doctors, commissions, etc. to make sure that don't happen, to protect him and protect his opponent. But yeah, anyway, going around in circles now, but the stuff he said about Breazeale's child, yeah, that's beyond the pale. But as far as him saying all this other stuff, look, I also mentioned in the last video I did about this subject that in America, they're not so sensitive about fighters saying these kind of things. Deontay Wilder, as far as I know, hasn't been fined for saying that he wanted to catch a body. I don't think he's even apologized for it. I know Mauricio Sulaiman or somebody from the WBC came out and made a couple of comments and said that they would be speaking to Deontay Wilder about it, but nothing has happened. He hasn't been fined, and he's come out and said he wants to cripple Breazeale. So in America, they're not so, I guess they're not so unrealistic about what they expect from fighters. You know, they're not so unrealistic. But I do understand the argument where people are saying, look, if you want boxing to be in schools, if you want mums to bring their kids to the gym to learn discipline and all this kind of stuff, it's not good for a heavyweight champion to be talking about killing people in the ring. Yeah, that's not exactly going to inspire confidence in the parents who, you know, bringing their kids to the gym and whatnot. And I hear that argument. You know, the whole idea of bringing kids to the gym to learn boxing and whatnot, my take on it is you're not necessarily preparing them for professional boxing, because professional boxing and amateur boxing are very different sports. Professional boxing is far more brutal in and out of the ring than amateur boxing is. So the point I'm making is I'm not sure that it's even a good thing for a parent to be bringing their child to an amateur gym with a view to having this child go on and become a professional fighter. I'm not even sure if that's a good thing, to be honest with you. You know, certainly not pushing them in that direction because, as I say, boxing is so brutal. Would you want your child to go into such a brutal sport? Chris Eubanks Sr. said that he tried to prevent his son, Junior, from becoming a boxer. He denied him access to a boxing gym and all that kind of stuff for several years. But Eubank Jr. was just so persistent that eventually he said, you know what? If I don't allow him to box, he's just going to go elsewhere to someone else's gym or somewhere else away from my supervision or my guidance, and he's more likely to get hurt with someone else than he is with me. So if he's so determined to become a boxer, fine. But he did initially try to steer him away from the sport because it is so brutal. But when he got into boxing, and look, Eubank Sr. has made mistakes with his son's career. His son has made mistakes, but he's also done some things well, right? His son is a millionaire. How old is he now? And he hasn't really beaten elite name and is a millionaire. Okay, so he's obviously done some things right. He's obviously managed them well to get him into that position and get him so rich. But anyway, one of the things he told his son, and his son understands this anyway, is that you have to be ruthless in this sport, or else this sport will consume you. You have to be ruthless outside the ring, and you have to be ruthless in the ring. That's the only way you're going to survive, and that's exactly what I've talked about with regards to the mentality of somebody like a Deontay Wilder or a Mike Tyson or a Gerald McClellan. This is their approach. Now, I'm not saying that that's what Eubank Jr. was trying to do to any opponent, but certainly we know that of Deontay Wilder, and certainly we know that of Mike Tyson, and I'm telling you, there are countless other fighters who go into the ring with those kind of malevolent intentions. That's just their process, and I accept that. That's what I'm trying to say here. I accept that some fighters go into the ring with this on their mind, and I accept it. It's a brutal sport. Whether they should talk about it openly or not, we can debate that. We can definitely debate that. Anyway, yeah, let me know how you feel about this in the comment section below. Dominic Breazeale has responded. Maybe I'll do a separate video on Dominic Breazeale's response. But I just wanted to talk about Deontay Wilder's latest comments here, which have caused outrage and uproar. So, yeah, let me know how you feel about everything I've talked about in this particular video. It's happening, I'm out.